I'm Benjamin Perrier. I'm a legal scholar. I'm working for Borders and Globalization project. I'm working on borders, as you know, and I'm a researcher with the Big Lab project. So I'm doing some database work and also some classes and also some writing. But the floor is yours, and you could start, Paola, to describe who are you and where are you from?
Oh, yes, sure.
Short sentence.
I'm Paola Malaspina. I'm from Italy. Currently, I'm a custom officer, Italian custom officer on leave. I live in the United States, and I currently live for Italian Foreign Ministry in the United States, in Texas, for the Italian consulate.
Thank you, Paola.
Thank you.
Anastasios, could you present yourself, please?
Yes, hello. My name is Anastasios Karaferis. I am customs officer in a small customs station between Greece and Albania. I am from Greece. I live in Greece. Yes, and I work for public. I'm working in independent authority of public revenue in Greece.
Thank you, Anastasios. Do you have Rodolfo? Rodolfo, could you present yourself in a few words, please? Don't know if he hears me. Rodolfo, are you here? Rodolfo Ignacio Jose Monti from Argentine Customs. Leader. Benson, are you here? Could you tell us a few words about you?
Yes, I'm here. If you can hear me well.
Yes.
You can hear me?
Yes, Benson, we hear you well. You could present yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Benson Nyamweno. I'm from Kenya. I'm based at Egerton University, where I work as an adjunct lecturer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Benson. Noura, could you present yourself?
Good morning. My name is Nora, and I'm a UVic student with Dr. Emmanuel. So my research centers around immigration and particularly newcomer health. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nora. Tobias, could you present yourself in a few seconds?
Sure. I'm Tobias. I'm a PhD student at the Department of Politics and Government in Cork in Ireland. And my research focuses on public administration in cross-border cooperation and border regions.
Thank you, Tobias. And your background, Tobias, is political science, huh?
Exactly, political sciences and public administration.
Okay, thank you, Tobias. Okay, I think some students could come a little bit later, but we could start our lesson right now. So don't hesitate to interact with me for any questions, any comments, any remarks. Okay, you have the chat for that. We are here to interact with each other, and we are all learning together about what is borders, what are the issues about borders, bordering processes, etc. So the audience today, you have some custom officials, so they are professionals. You have some students, PhD students. We have also some, the majority, I think it's customs officers and the professional in the administration, and there's also some students. So we are like, three three types of students today. So hello everyone, welcome aboard for this Institute's Law of Borders. My name is Ben Perrier, I'm a researcher with the Big Lab project, and with Big Lab project, we work on the complexity of international borders and new forms of legal borders in the world. So you have been selected for the law of borders in the 21st century, but you have, I don't know if you know, but you have the Summer Institute is divided in 8 institutes. So on the website of BIG, you could discover you have a specific institute focused on trade and customs border management, another institute with cross-border management, another institute which is about immigration, managing borders and bodies. Another institute is about security border management. Another institute is about indigenous border management. And the last one is about ecological border management. In our case, we are going to focus on the law of borders this week. So do you have access to your bright space so you could have a sense of the agenda today? We are going to speak about the introduction to border studies, the history of borders, and the juridical approach about borders. And this afternoon, we are going to speak about the law of territorial delimitation. But let me start with the territory acknowledgement. We acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose territory the university stands, and the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Saanich peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. Territory acknowledgement, what is it? In Canada, territory acknowledgement serves as a meaningful and necessary practice rooted in acknowledging and respecting the indigenous peoples who have inhabited these lands since time immemorial. And this practice recognizes the historical and ongoing presence of indigenous nations and their inherent rights to their traditional territories. So because you are interested by the law of borders, when I say territories of indigenous people, we speak about the legal dimension of the sovereignty of indigenous people in their own territory. And this dimension of indigenous peoples, indigenous borders, and the critical approach of the modern state and the modern borders from the perspective of indigenous people will be explored in this institute. So we have designed this institute, Law of Borders, with the main idea that borders in law are a complex juridical regime. And it requires an approach with multiple branches of law and also an interdisciplinary approach to grasp the richness of the complex phenomenon of borders. This week, I have invited some precious guests like Nick Megoran. Tomorrow, you will have Nick Megoran, who is political geographer in Newcastle University. He will speak about borders singularities, and he will speak about the creative ways to make international boundaries work for borderland communities. That's my first guest, and it's tomorrow morning about borders singularities. Let me check if some students have joined. Okay, some people have joined. Sorry, okay. So I have a second guest, is Daniel McFarland for Wednesday morning. He is a specialist in the Great Lakes governance and cross-border cooperation for the Great Lakes. So it will be an amazing presentation. The afternoon, we have Kent McNeil and Andrew Umbers. They will share with us a critical approach, critical approach about borders from the indigenous perspectives. Thursday morning, we will have the expert on the EU borders, Frédéric Béraud. And Frédéric Béraud will speak about the effects of the European Union law on European internal and external borders. The afternoon, we have Emmanuel Brunet-Jailly, who is going to speak about borderlands as zones of common law in the European Union. Friday morning, we will have the expert Martin Pratt. Martin Pratt is a geographer, but he has been involved for the last 20 years in the expertise of delimitation in front of International Court of Justice for the governments or for the public sectors. So he will bring to us the knowledge of the practitioners, how it works, how we delimitate the territory, and what are the challenges when we try to delimitate the territory, and he will use the map to illustrate this complexity. And the afternoon, Friday afternoon, the last session will be with Richard Saint-Marseille, and Richard Saint-Marseille will focus on the dimension of border control and the control of border with the perspectives of Canadian administration. So we have a very important guest this week, and I'm sure it will go very well with this level of expertise, and I'm sure you will be happy to share your thoughts, your reflections, your remarks with them. So as I said, we have designed this institute with the idea with borders as a complex object, complex legal object with multiple dimensions. The dimension of the line. But the dimension of the line is just one dimension. It's not the most important one. It's fundamental, but it's not the only one. You have also the dimension of control, the control of entry. As the professional of customs here, they know what it means, controlling the borders. And the last 20 years, we have noticed a transformation in the border control. The control could be ahead the borders, after the borders. The control of customs could be in the airports, in the ports of entry. They don't have to be located at the borders. That's the dimension of control. But we have also the dimension of the link, the border link, with the international neighborhood law and with the cross-border transnational law. We have also the dimension of the zone, of area of cooperations, because as we know, borders are not only lines, they are also borderlands. They are also zones where the people are living. So all these dimensions are part of the complex approach of the borders. We have multiple dimensions: the line, the filter, the link, the zone, but also if we dig more, we will understand that borders are also dispositives, legal dispositives of control, of discrimination, of differentiation. So all these dimensions will be shared with you during this week. So borders are not only separations, they are also cooperation. That's the very important idea you need to have in the mind since now to understand what is a border. Border is not only separation, it's also cooperations. And you have this ontological ambivalence, which is at the core of the border object. The core object of the borders is at the same time separation and cooperation. It's not only separation and it's not only cooperation, it's both. That's the complexity of borders. So today, borders influence our daily lives in profound ways. And in this institute, we'll explore the laws that deal with borders, how countries decide where their borders lies, how they settle disagreements about them, and how they work together across borders. We will talk about pre-modern borders, and I will ask some questions with you because during these sessions, I will interact with you very often to ask you some questions about your interest for borders, about your experience about borders. So we will talk about pre-modern borders. It means the borders which are existing before the states. We are going to speak, of course, about the current legal regime of borders today. And we are going to speak also about the legal nature of post-states borders in the EU with Frédéric Béraud. So the goal of the game today is to help you to create in your mind a legal representation of borders, not only limited to the line, that's very important in this class to help you, to share with you an approach of borders with multiple angles, multiple dimensions, multiple regimes, okay? We are focusing finally on the representation we have in our mind about what is a border. And all this week is focused on the work on this representation, this mental representation we have about borders. So the goal of the game of this institute is to share with you a representation of the international border with several elements, dimensions, and perspectives. You will have a 360% lecture of what is a border. So we look forward to learning and growing with you as we navigate the dynamic landscape of border law together. So let's unpack the complexities of border laws together and understand why they matter so much in our interconnected world. Whether you're curious about the process of drawing borders, resolving conflicts over them, or facilitating cooperation between nations, this course will provide a comprehensive understanding. Once again, welcome on board. I'm letting other people entering. Okay, perfect. So do you see my PowerPoint? Yes, all good. Tobias is good. Okay. Everyone see my PowerPoint? I could share with you. It works. Okay.
Yes, we are able to see it. We are able to see it. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Benson. Thank you, Tobias. Okay, perfect. Okay, so that's the program of the week. I already said about that. You could have access to the Brightspace, so I'm not going into that. The most important, the design of this class, you are going to listen this and be part of this week is seriously, it's about the multiple dimension, legal dimension of borders. In the session 1 today and the session 2 today, we are going to speak about the history of borders and the law of border delimitation. I present already the details of the session. So normally the session is divided in 60 minutes of lecture with a question and answer with you. Don't hesitate to interact with me, to raise your hand or to write your question in the chat, because it's an interactive process, okay? I'm not here alone in my room speaking with, with you around the world. We are all together in this process. So we will have a break, and after that we will have a practicum. Normally, you have access to the practicum in the Brightspace. Tell me in a second if you add everything on the Brightspace, like the practicum for this morning and the practicum for this afternoon. You know the Brightspace, have you checked the Brightspace? Have you been able to see the content of the class? Yes? You have no problem with the access of Brightspace because everything is on the Brightspace. You have the readings, you have the practicums, you have the contents, okay? So that Brightspace is very the interface, or you could have all the content. So as I say, why we have designed this class like that? Because we think, and it's our hypothesis of research, and also the things we need to prove, borders are a complex juridical construction. This week, we are going to focus on the modern state border, and we will focus on the 4 main juridical dimensions of the borders: the border line, the border control, the border link, and the border zone, with the dimension of the historical evolution of borders, and also the critical dimension of the modern state and the modern borders systems. Because you have some experts in the room, like a PhD students, like Tobias, or like an expert in customs, we know the borders, the international delimitation of a function of limits, of legal limit. And this legal limit is variable. It's variable depending the context. It's variable depending the branches of law. That's very important to understand that borders have a legal function of limit, and this limit is variable depending the context and the branches of law. I have some guests in my room. Emmanuel, you want to say some words? We have Emmanuel Bonejaï, who is the supervisor of the Summer Institutes and the director of the Big Lab. He could share with us a few words.
Good evening, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for taking the institutes. I hope you have a wonderful time with Ben. The one thing that I want to say very, very briefly is that this voter course is one of our 3 electives, and it allows you to, the one on law allows you to specialize if you are interested in getting the microcredit, right? To get a microcredit, you need to take 3 courses. You need to take the voter management, you could take voter law, and then you can take one of the 4 electives that we have. If you are interested in doing this, you need to do a short policy paper in this course as well, right? So that's the one thing that I just want to remind you of, is that you can take the course, get a certificate, and that's great. You want to do a little bit more, and you are interested in doing a stream, you have to take 3 courses: management, law, or management, immigration, or management, custom, and then take one of the electives. What can I say else? This course on border law is one of my favorites. Benjamin last year had the best teaching evaluation of all our participants. So I think it's a really, really interesting course, and it allows you to basically get a sense of how legal frameworks around the world have evolved to help you manage, but also sometimes to help you just avoid disputes across borders, right? So it also helps you understand how legal frameworks, in a way, organize cross-border trade or cross-border mobility, right? When people travel across international boundaries. I don't want to take any more time than that. I see there is a raised hand, so can't see the name, but
What's the name?
Alimayu, take the floor. Put your microphone on, make sure it's on. And
I think Alimayu has a sound problem.
Okay, so you can write it in the chat and we'll read it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Alimayu, do you listen to us? Are you able to listen to us? Or we are just not able to listen to you? There's different problem. I think we can't listen to him. I can't listen to him. How could we manage that?
You can turn. Alimayu, sometime if you turn the video off, the sound is higher, and then you can hear us better, you can speak higher. Turn the camera off. Or you use the chat to write a question. But this is why it's important to have the chat on, is because it allows you to interact during the class with each other, but also with the instructor.
Okay, so Alimayu, confirm the problem, please. Are you listening to us? No, I think he doesn't listen to us. Anyway, he should go. He should leave the room and go back, huh? Alimayu. Sorry, guys. I tried to help Alimayu. Try to disconnect and come back, please.
Go around the world to ask people to introduce themselves.
Yeah. But I missed some people because some people were late. So we will continue our small presentations. Thank you, Mary. And you are good?
Yeah, it's all good.
We will have Karabo. Karabo, could you present yourself in a few seconds? And also Ramesh and also Sean. Please, you have the floor. Present yourself in 30 seconds. We have done that like 10 minutes ago. Karabo, you have the floor. Please present yourself. Carabo, are you here? Okay, no, Carabo is not. He's here, but Ramesh, could you present yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Ramesh.
And Sean, could you present yourself? So who is speaking, please? Sean or Ramesh?
This is Ramesh.
Okay,
So
Ramesh, we hear you.
I'm a customs officer from India. So currently I'm posted in risk management agency in customs, which decides the border control. So I'm happy to be a part of this fellowship. So I'm looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ramesh. Sean, you have the floor.
Hi, good morning. Sorry for my late appearance. I messed up the time zone difference. I've been a Border Services Officer with the Canadian Border Services Agency for 24 years. I'm currently a superintendent at a small port of entry in northwestern Ontario in Treaty 3 territory. We're the last border crossing in Ontario before you get to Manitoba. Very excited to be in the course, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Sean. Carabo, you said in the chat, you asked us if we can hear you, but we can't hear you. Could you try again, please?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Carabo, we hear you very well. Could you present yourself, please?
Okay, let me just turn on my video. Can you see me?
Yes. Where are you? Okay, here.
Yeah. Okay, I'll say good evening because it's evening my side. Good evening, everyone. I am Garaboranto. I am a Customs and Excise Officer with the South African Revenue Services, and I am glad to be part of this fellowship. Looking forward to learning more.
Thank you very much, Carabo. Okay, I think Alemayu is solving the problem. I hope he will listen to us. I think it's just a sound connection from his own computer or his own earrings. Sometimes we need to try different button in the Zoom thing. Okay, let's continue. Hello, everyone. Again, you see again my slides. Are okay, these slides? You see it? Okay, thank you, Tobias. Thank you, Tobias. You are in the middle of my screen. I see you when you are moving your your head. Okay, so as I said, in this class, you will discover borders as a complex juridical phenomenon with multiple dimensions. So the professional of customs will be interested to discover other dimensions of their work. They will discover the borderline or the question of territorial delimitation. This dimension of borderlines includes the disputes, the singularities, the mapping work, but includes also the history of borderlines and territorial delimitations. You have the dimension of border control. Of course, the professional of custom know better than me what is the control of borders. And that's the dimension of filter, of control of borders. It includes defense, police, customs, sanitary, immigration, asylum, but also human rights at the borders. And we know control could be located in multi-site. We have the dimension of border link, and that's a very important dimension. It's linked with the international neighborhood relations and the law of territorial contiguity between states, which are neighbors. And it includes international treaties or any legal principles which are related to state contiguity. We have the dimension of the border zone, and that's the questions of the spaces of cooperations and spaces of common life across borders. That's very important all around the world, because that's a very important focus. That's the cross-border cooperation for the benefits of the borderlanders. So as you could see, borders are not only lines, borders are not only delimitations, it's a complex legal construction. And that's the main idea in the class this week. We will have also the chance to have to receive like a critical approach of modern state borders from the indigenous perspectives, and also from the European Union perspective with Frédéric Perrault. That's a very important approach, because this critical approach will help us to understand what are the other reality of laws behind the modern state, the dominant modern state system. You know, we will have the chance to listen the indigenous people perspectives during this week. So unfortunately, we have just 5 days and we can't speak about everything. So we won't be able to speak about citizenship and law of citizenship. We won't be able to speak about cultural dimensions, and we won't be able to speak about international private law, penal law or civil law, okay? We have a broad approach of the borders this week. What will you know at the end of the class? You will have the big picture of the relation between law and borders. You will have the capacity to understand by yourself and to have your own reasoning, your own reflections about what are borders and how you could use these classes, how you could use this knowledge in your daily life, professional or PhD, or maybe professor and teacher later in your writings. And also it will help you to understand what is a border through the lens of law. You will have the knowledge about the legal history of territorial boundaries and borders. You will have the knowledge of the rules of territorial delimitations. You will understand also the exceptions to the modern model of boundary lines. You will know the rules of dispute settlement. You will understand also the rules of international neighborhood, cross-border cooperation, and cross-border governance. And I know some members of the class today are very expert in this cross-border cooperation. You will have, as I said, the critical approach view of the modern legal system. You will understand better the juridical specificity of borders inside the EU and of the EU. We will think all together about how we could build transboundary spaces in the legal challenges with Emmanuel Brunet-Jaillet, who was just here 10 minutes ago. We will discover also the methods and the values of border mapping. And finally, we are going to learn about the rules of controls of crossing borders, but not customs rules, but the immigrations and asylum rules from the Canadian perspectives. So as we all know, the world today is fragmented into territorialized political units, modern states. As everyone, Tobias is from Ireland, Karabo is from South Africa, Paola is from Italy, and she's working in USA. So that's a reality. We live all in territorialized political units, and that's the modern system. Actually, that's the dominant system. We know, unfortunately, the news are full of deadly conflicts, like Russia-Ukraine war. If you look attentively the news, you will discover so that it's a trend since the last 20 years. A lot of walls and barriers have been built all around the world. 30,000 kilometers of barriers have been built during these last 10 years in the world. Unfortunately, also we have more and more victims of borders and at borders. So in a nutshell, we discover that this world, which is divided in 193 states, is a scene of multiple problems, issues, and challenges And I will ask you one question. Since 1945, since the charter, the UN Charter of International Law, we have seen the appearance of 80 new states in this world. So just 70 years ago, 60, 70, and 80 new states are members of the community, human community today. I will ask you one question. Do you think that Antarctica is part of the bordering processes or not? And another question, do you think the territorialization of the ocean are part of the new bordering legal process today or not? Someone could try to answer these questions. One question about Antarctica and one question about the territorialization of the oceans. Because it's two new trends for the last 20 years, which are very, very important in the domain of law of borders. Someone has an answer, someone has a remark, someone has a questions, don't hesitate to interact with us.
Can I comment on the ocean border?
Yeah, Nora, you have the floor, go.
So yes, I believe strongly that oceans or like the watery passages are part of the borders in today's world, particularly now between countries who try to gain control over many parts of oceans and seas as part of their dominance borders in terms of the military actions or trades. So it's part sometimes also of country sovereignty. Many of these countries try to divide or know their borders or expand their borders to have access to more resources or to more, to more power and control over who can cross or who not. And one of these cases now we can see the Red Sea with the Indian Ocean between Yemen and Egypt. And another one is the Mediterranean Sea now during Gaza war, where Israel tried to expand more of its control over the Mediterranean Sea to access more resources.
Thank you, Nora. Yes, you're very right. We observe a strong territorialization of the oceans with the capacity of the states to have a new legal space like economic exclusive zones or continental shelves. And the main objective for them, for the states, is of course to have the control of some natural resources. Thank you, Nora, for your comment. So in the news also, we have a lot of land and maritime boundary disputes. We have a lot of conflicts about fisheries, natural resources, as we have just spoke. We have a new border delimitations. Every week, maybe not every week, but every month, you have a new treaty of delimitation all around the world between 2 or 3 countries. You need to focus on the United Nations because they have the capacity to record all these new treaties about delimitations. You have also a new treaty of cooperations with the recent Franco-German and Franco-Italian and Franco-Spain treaties. That's the treaties about the law of neighborhood. But also, of course, borders are not only lines and source of disputes, they are also zone of exchanges, zone of cooperations, zone of movements and of flows. Look at these different news I found in the internet. A conflict between India and China about border in their mountains, in their common mountains. A governor of Arizona is creating border wall with shipping containers. A territorial dispute has been researched between China and Vietnam through the film Barbie, because a map was wrong and they were going to have a diplomatic problem with this map in this movie. Schengen, connected to Schengen. Schengen is a space without control in the European Union. Romania and Bulgaria haven't been accepted yet. Between Greece and Turkey, we have some sea border disputes. But we have also good history, like between Bolivia and Chile. They succeed to have to stop their conflict about an international river. Other news between the Canada and Denmark, they have accepted to share an island between their Greenland and the Canadian territory. US and Canada have successfully managed watershed pollutions recently. In the other part of the world, we have a conflict between South Korea and North Korea with different soldiers who are moving at the borders, and some governments are not happy with that. Paraguay is militarizing its southern border with Brazil. Brazil deploys troops to Venezuela border, etc., etc. So every week you could have a lot of news about borders and these multiple dimensions I shared with you: the border lines, the border link, the border zone, and the border controls. All the time you will see the news differently with this legal complex approach about borders. I have another question for you. Do you think borders are a product of balance of power? Do you think borders are a product of juridical relations? Do you think it's pure imaginative constructions, mental construction, it doesn't exist in the facts? Or do you think it's a legal constructions, very important for the law and very important as a perimeter of law, but also parameter of law? I would like to hear from you. What do you think, the big picture? What do you think with your background? What do you think, what is a border? What is a border? Exactly. Someone could share with us what they think about that. Do you think borders is just a pure balance of power, a conflict between forces? Do you think borders is more juridical relations made by treaties, so made by respect between 2 or 3 states about their own territories? Do you think borders is a juridical line, so maybe an abstract line which have zero existence in the field? What do you think about what is a border? If someone has a remark, don't hesitate, okay? Don't hesitate to share with us your own thought. So what is the interest of this class and this objective? I told you multiple times, it's give you, Sean, do you have a question? Do you have a remark?
Yeah, I just had a comment on the question that you asked. I suppose to answer that question, it would depend on your perspective. Because if, here in Canada, if you're an Indigenous person, you're probably not going to view the border the same way as, say, somebody who worked at the Canada Border Services Agency. They've signed many treaties where they have this right to cross that imaginary line for familial purposes and for trade and these sorts of activities. So yeah, that's not a very easy question to answer. And again, I would say it depends on your perspective.
Thank you, Sean. Yes, you're right. It depends on from where we are speaking and from which background we are. In this week, you will learn also from the Indigenous perspectives. That's a very important day. It will be Wednesday afternoon. And we have Kent McLean, which is one of the top leader of critical approach of modern borders. And we have also Andrew Ambers, who is a lawyer, who is going to speak about the title of the Indigenous people on the sea, not only on the land, but also on the sea. So you're right, Sean, it depends on the perspectives. And that's the goal of this week, is to bring the different perspectives to help everyone aboard to understand better the complexity of borders. So at the end of this class, you will be able to mobilize these different theoretical approaches of borders, okay? You will have the capacity to describe and analyze different situations according to a pluralistic approach of legal borders and legal branches. The key question of this class is, where do the borders come from in a reading of history and legal history? What is a border in law? And we try to answer with Sean. What is the methodology for analyzing borders in law? What are the juridical branches of study of border law? What are the juridical development and transformation of the border object and the juridical way of seeing, thinking about borders? And how to translate the complexity of borders into law and public decisions. Let's go to the agenda today. We are going to speak for the next 20 minutes about pre-modern borders, pre-modern bordering processes. I told you pre-modern is a terminology which is useful to describe all the phenomena connected to the peripheries of states, but before the appearance of states, before the appearance of the modern system. We could call that pre-modern borders and bordering phenomena. They are pre-modern because they exist before the appearance of the modern state system. Okay? We are going to speak about different examples about pre-modern borders. Sorry. Let's start with two quotations. The history of borders merges with that people. Do you hear me well in the room? Yes, it's okay. Okay. So let's start with two quotations. Sorry for these little challenges with the technology. The history of borders merges with that of peoples and states. It corresponds to sociological, human, legal, and geographical need of the communities which have to regulate their reciprocal relations as well as their mutual existence. That's a very important quotation from an expert of borders, Ahmed Abu El-Wafa, in 2010. When we read this quotation, it seems evident that borders are human constructions, political construction of humans, legal construction of humans, because it exists multiple human groups. The condition of existence of borders is the existence of multiple human groups which have been politicized, which have been legalized as different groups. That's the condition of appearance of borders, of political borders. And borders are just relations between different human groups, if you understand me well. Borders, if it doesn't exist, if multiple human groups don't exist, you can't have borders. Borders is just the expressions of the pluralistic existence of multiple human groups, which have been growing up since the Neolithic. Other quotation from Michel Fouché. Michel Fouché is a diplomat, geographer, political analyst, one on a very important expert on borders. He said, the first borders appear around 1850 BC. They are Nubian stelae with texts, rules, and border guards screening caravans. As soon as a state claims to exercise exclusive authority over territory, there is a form of boundary. There is a phenomenon of appropriation, a function of control or filtering. Have you noticed for the custom officer in the room? Because the control of borders from the custom perspective is like 5,000 years age. It's an old profession. It's an old technique of the state to control what's going on at their borders. That's a very important quotation who help us to understand the long history of borders and border phenomenon and the long history of customs in the legal history of borders. Let's speak about the Neolithic Revolution, because I think, and a lot of others think, that Neolithic Revolution is the birth of the political systems. Of course, it was a long period between 13,000 and 6,000 years. But this Neolithic period is important to understand the roots of the appearance of political system and the roots of the first territories, and finally the roots of the first borders. And why Neolithization is an important period? Because we saw multiple innovation, multiple revolutions. We saw the way of life of human groups have changed. They were less mobile and they started to develop their agriculture. That's a very important step, very important shift in the life of humanity. Even though mobile people still exist today with mobile cultures, but at this moment we have started to see the predominance of agriculture. And when you have agriculture, you start to be sedentary. And when you have agricultural products, you need to protect them. You fear you will lose them. You fear you will lose them for the weather, for the conditions of the weather, but you fear you will be stolen. So you start to think to protect your products, and you start to think with borders as walls. You start to think to protect your products from agriculture. But it's not only the sedentary thing, it's not only the agriculture. You have also the domestication of plants, the domestication of livestock like sheep, goat, pig, beef, and food stock. Everything linked with this food stock needs to be protected. That's the first idea you have to have in mind when you understand the importance, this shift between mobile groups and sedentary groups. And also during this Neolithic, we have seen some technical innovations like pottery, tools, etc. But one of the main the main modification is the modification of the occupation of the territory. It's not only agriculture with new seeds, it's also the political approach of the territory have changed at this moment. But it was a long period, okay? It was 6,000 years of existence, this Neolithic. So it's a long period. But it's also the existence of the first villages and the first kingdoms and the first system of hierarchy between different social classes. All these things, all these innovations, all these new methods have appeared during this Neolithics. So Neolithics is a key period of time of human history to understand where our borders from. I have read in the article that maybe static boundaries have been existed already between hunter and gatherer tribes. Hunter and gatherer tribes, they are not specialized in agriculture, it's the opposite. But even though between the groups of hunter and gatherer, they could have been, borders could have been existing between them. That's a part of the complexity. It's not only between sedentary people, but if we dig more and more into knowledge of borders, even though between hunter and gatherer tribes, you could have the existence of territorialities and of borders between them. We find the first evidences of the first pre-modern borders in the Sumerian mythology. In this Sumerian mythology, like myth Enki, the famous myth Enki and the world order, we could identify the concept of borders. It's written in their myth that countries are the private domain of the gods who fixed their borders and continuously kept them under observation. But you imagine, we are in the mythology. In mythology. We are in 3,000 years before Christ, so it means 5,000 years before now, and they have elaborated mythology, and in this mythology, they have the concept of borders because gods were the chief of their people, but also the chief and the protectors of their lands. And they were also able to measure and mark the borders. So it's not only a methodology about virtual borders, it's also a methodology with concrete borders in the fields. We could find also examples of pre-modern borders in the ancient Greek mythology and in the Roman mythology. Like the famous one is Janus. Janus is a god with double face. It is a god of the beginnings and the endings, the god of the passages and the doors. We have also the famous Terminus. Terminus, he was not able to walk. He was a god which was the god of the bones, of the markers, because every bones at these times, every markers should stay on the right place without moving. That's Terminus, one of the Roman god. He was symbolizing the immobility of the boundary marker. Very important finding in the archaeology. We have the city palette. City palette is from 3,300 and 3,100 before Christ, so 5,000 years before today. What could we see on this tablet? In the left picture, you have some animals, which could be a symbol of agriculture, but or with the livestock, as we spoke 10 minutes ago. But in the right side, the big picture, you could see, if you could see well, you could see fortifications. It's different fortifications of different cities. And you have a symbol at the top of the fortifications, like an animal, like you have a monkey, you have a fish, you have a bird, and you have different symbols like that. So 3,000 years before Christ, 5,000 years before today, we have political powers in place. We have fortifications. We have political symbols of every cities. That's very important to understand the deepest history of the existence of political borders. Another great example, we are in Egypt. We are in Egypt, and it's the same, 5,000 years ago. Okay, it's around 3,200 before Christ. You could see a palette. A palette is a kind of stone used for the makeup of people in the Egyptian time. But we are 3,000 years before Christ. On this palette, the Egyptologist Bernadette Menu have identified borders. Borders are drawn on this palette. Where? Because when I looked at this palette, I don't see very well borders. I see peoples, I see gods, I see symbols of animals. I see also a scene of war. I see also some people who are working, but where is the representation of the borders 3,000 years before Christ, or 5,000 years before today? And for this Egyptologist, the standards, you could see the standards on the left side. The standards are just this little flag, if you want, which have with some people who are wearing them on the top of their stick. Okay, that's the standards. And for this author, for this Egyptologist, these standards are territorial markers that defines Egypt's borders. You could see here, I zoom. You could see the 4 standards with different animals at the top of the sticks, and the pharaoh at the left. And these Egyptologists have identified these standards are the representations of borders of the Egypt territory. That's a very important piece of history for the legal borders, because at this time is the birth of the first centralized state. The first centralized state is born at this time with the pharaoh called Narmer. And this Narmer is the first king of unified Egypt. And at this time, 5,000 years ago, this Narmer, this pharaoh Narmer, was able to divide his territory in 40 circumscriptions, in 40 different districts. So it was a well-elaborated political structure 5,000 years ago. Okay, the king Narmer was also an organizer, but also a warrior. Okay, I go quickly on that. Another god in the Egyptian time, the god Thoth, is the god of knowledge and of the limits. This god, Thoth, was the boss, was the chief of every drawings, every plans of sanctuary. He was the boss of the political geography of Egypt, if you want. It was him who was the knowledge of the mapping. It was him who has the power to decide where are the limits and where are not the limits. That's a very important god in the mythology of Egypt, connected to the history of states and of borders. A very important evidence also of the existence of borders in the pre-modern time. The stele of the vultures. In the stele of the vultures, so you imagine a stele and you imagine the inscription in this stele, and in these inscriptions you could read this phrase: "May the man of Uma never cross the border of Ningirsu. May he not alter the slope and the ditch. May he not move the stelae." So it's a very important proof of the existence of pre-modern borders, and we are 2,500 before Christ. It's this stele of the vulture commemorates in text and image an important victory won by the king of Lagash over the neighboring city of Uma about rich irrigated borderlands. And you have a wonderful article in the readings in the Bright Space. You could read it and you will have all the knowledge about the existence of these borderlands at this time and of these borders between irrigated lands. That's a zoom in about the portion of the stele of the vulture. They call that stele of the vulture because on the top of this vulture, of the stela, you have vultures which have been sculpted in the stone. That's a very important example of the existence of borders in a specific area between two kingdoms, between two strong cities, and a complex also financial relations for the borderlands between these two cities. You will have all the details about that in the reading. Let's continue our adventure in the time. Let's travel more and more in the time again with the law of Hammurabi. The law of Hammurabi, Hammurabi was a king of Sumer. He was one of the first legal, I would say, a legal writer, code. He wrote a code. But of course, it was a law based on cases. It was not general rules. It was not like a modern code as we could find in our life today. But it's a very important proof of the existence of ancient law in the kingdom of Hammurabi. That's a beautiful stela, and this stela is on the museum of the Louvre in Paris. But what I want to share with you is one article of this Hammurabi law, the article 23, and it's written like that. Of course, it's old Sumerian language, but one specialist in Sumerian language has been able to translate. If the robber has not been caught, the robbed man shall sue before God for what he lost, and the city and the governor in whose territory and boundaries the robbery was committed shall restore to him all that he lost. Have you seen this article 23 in the law of the Babylonian king Hammurabi? You have the proof also of the existence of territories, of boundaries, and also the importance of the legal regime of not crossing the borders. this legal regime of not crossing the borders, and I made the link with the customs officer today, it's a long history. And I think if we think that's the obligation to not cross the border, the obligation to not touch the border marker, it's very connected to the concept of delimitation. Even though at this time you don't have a clear delimitation, but you have strong markers, strong political representation of the legal regime of not crossing the borders. Not crossing the borders, it's a very important role in the ancient times, as we have seen in these different examples, because gods were the first lawyer, if you want. A very important finding also, the letters of Amarna. And we are a little bit in 1,000 years before Christ, so it means 4,000 years before today, or 3,500 years before today. They have found a lot of tablets in stones. And on these tablets, 350 tablets, it was the Twitter of this time. They were exchanging their messages, their political messages between different kingdoms. And in these letters, they have description of diplomatic relations. They have description of international relations between equivalent powers, or between independent kingdoms, or between vassal kingdoms. These letters of Amarna, I invite you to dig more on this example, famous and fabulous example of strong relationships between different kingdoms for different topics. Could be marriages between their kids, or it could be borders, it could be territories, it could be commerce, it could be customs, it could be alliances, it could be military defenses purposes. That's a very important source of information about pre-modern borders. Let's travel now in the ancient India with Ashoka the Great. Ashoka the Great, he was one of the king of a kingdom in the ancient India, and we are 300 before Christ, so 2,300 years before today. This Ashoka is famous for different things, but he has been able to develop like legal writings. And these legal writings were not written on paper, of course, they were sculpted on different pillars. And these different pillars with the inscriptions of the edicts were used as the markers of these kingdoms, of territorial markers of his kingdoms. And we could read on these different inscriptions on the pillars from Ashoka the Great that all these pillars were placed along trade routes and in the border cities where the edicts would be read by the largest number of people possible. So at this time of Ashoka, he was using pillars as a symbol and also as a tool of communication for his people, to share with the people, you are in the territory of Ashoka the Great. You need to respect my religion, and you need to do the same that I'm doing. And the important piece here, the borders are not around the territory. The borders symbolized by the pillars, symbolized by the markers, are on the routes, are placed on the roads, at the specific crossroads. They are not all around the territories as today. They are just placed road by road at the best location possible to receive the most publicity, but also to have the most impact with the other travelers or other kingdoms. And in this edict of Ashoka, you could read that the Ashoka the Great knows perfectly the neighboring kingdoms around his own kingdoms. So all these examples to share with you the existence of borders, of border markers, of legal regimes, of not crossing the borders, of legal regime of not touching the border marker, but also the capacity for these different states at this time, the different kingdoms, to develop relations with neighbors about their own borders, and also legal dispute at this time. So a lot of examples of the existence of pre-modern borders, and maybe we have thousands and thousands of examples, but I try to choose the best one to illustrate with you the long legal history of borders. Let's finish the pre-modern border in the ancient time with the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, it was a strong political power 2,000 years ago. They survived 1,000 years. It was an empire who survived from the start to the end, like more than 1,000 years. So it was a strong political constructions. And I will open an interaction period with you about borders of the Roman empires. With the example I gave you just before, how could you think the Roman Empire have been able to control all this Mediterranean Sea and all the territories around the Mediterranean Sea? And I ask you the simple question: how were the borders of the Roman Empire around this Roman Empire? Could you give me your own reflection about how the Roman Empire were able to build their own borders with other countries which have not been subjected to their power? What are the kind of Roman Empire borders? Some people in the class have ideas or thoughts, please. Don't hesitate, and don't hesitate to interact with us. It's very important to interact with me and me to interact with you. So if you have any comments, you could you could write on the chat, but you could raise your hand. And you could interact with me or with the team on the room, with Sandrine or Benjamin. So I give you one idea, one example. The Roman Empire were not only able to build fortifications at their borders, but fortifications were just one example of their politics of borders. They were used, this fortification, to control the flows of people. Like the Hadrian's walls and the Antonine walls, the main importance, the main purpose of these walls were to control the access to the Roman Empire, to control the mobility of people from the north. But it was not the only technique they had. They had a lot of techniques. Example, they were able to pass alliances with their neighbors. Why it's important to have alliances with their neighbors, which are not part of the Roman Empire? These neighbors could be used as buffer states. What is a buffer state? What is a buffer zone? So the Roman Empire were enough aware about the complexity of their territory and about the immensity of their territory. And it was impossible to create fortification all around their territories. It exists a little bit fortification everywhere, but it was not the only piece. The very important legal piece is the treaties of alliances with the neighbors. And with these alliances with their neighbors, the Roman Empire could breathe, because the first layer of protections were these allies. The allies all around our Roman Empire were able to defend themselves, but at the same time, defend the first layer before entering in the Roman Empire. That's a very important example of political negotiation, of bordering processes. at the Roman Empire time. Okay, sorry, you have some, okay. Carabo, you say the geographical structure allowed for control of the neighbors. Yes, fortification lasted for 1,000 years. Alliances were weak and this took to the end of the Roman Empire. Yes, but after 1,000 years of alliance. Okay, okay, perfect. Let's go in the medieval age now. Wait, my screen is blocked. Okay. So after antique time, with all these examples I shared with you, what forms did medieval borders have? Medieval borders. Alors, it's a common sense to think borders didn't exist before the state system, before treaties of Westphalia or before 1945. But it's not true. A lot of borders and a lot of limits were playing a role in the ancient times, but also in the medieval times. We could think medieval times is like an old age, dark age, with zero evolution, with zero innovation. It's wrong. It was complex kingdoms, complex empires, all intertwined together by familial relations, by political negotiations, by commerce, and they have a lot of borders. Of course, it was not a state before, but it was borders of kingdoms. Even though the church, the Catholic Church at this time, were able to divide the territory of the church by different dioceses. So at this medieval time, it exists multiple borders with multiple significations, with multiple legal values. Sometimes in the Carolingian times, you have precise and linear boundaries. Other times, you have just marches or border zones. Border zones is a zone where we don't know which king has the power on this zone. But these marches, they call that marches, border zones. They were also used as a system of defense. And sometimes borders, of course, were not linear and it was confusing. Do you think global borders could exist during the Middle Ages? Question for you, and I have the example of Treaty of Tordesillas and the Treaty of Saragossa. Very important borders in the legal history of borders. Someone has an idea about the existence of global borders during the Middle Age with these two examples, the two treaties? Someone knows about that? Look at that. The Treaty of Tordesillas divided the globe in two powers, the Empire of Spain and the Empire of Portugal. And they fixed a limit as the meridian of the 40 degrees west. And to the west, the Spanish part, and to the east, the Portuguese part. You could see it here. The violet line from the North Pole to the South Pole was the line of delimitation between the two empires. Portugal, the Empire of Portugal were to the west, were to the east, and the Spanish Empire were to the east. But after their navigations, they meet themselves again on the Moluccan Island, on the Green Line. You know what I mean? They started to divide the globe in two empires, one empire for Spain, one empire for Portugal, but they forgot the Earth was round, and they forgot they will meet in the other sphere. So they meet finally in the other sphere, and that's the existence of the Treaty of Saragossa, when they divide a second time the globe in two empires at this 133-degree east longitude. It was the source of Moluccan War. That's an interesting legal example of global borders in the time of medieval age. Well, we don't go into details of the problem of the Pope, etc. And of course, the other empires at this time, they were not happy with these divisions, and the other empires, so the English Empire, the French Empire, etc. They were not respecting this division, of course. What time is it?
It's 9:23.
Huh?
9:23.
9:23, thank you. 9:23, we started. Okay. Paola, you have a question? You have the floor, Paola.
Oh, yes, Ben, thanks. Just a curiosity. Do you consider these agreements, I mean, belonging to the Middle Ages? Because I try to explain. In many history books, all that happens after discovery of America, after 1492, we call it the modern age, and so we consider it the end of Middle Ages. I don't know.
Okay, so your question is about what, the terminology?
Yeah, or just a sort of history classification. I don't know. Maybe it's something that I was taught in school or is not more updated. So just curiosity.
Okay.
History curiosity.
Now that's very important to, yeah, your question is very important because it's like a periodization of history.
Yeah.
It's
always
that's the specialty of historian. The historian, their specialty is to create, to be periodization of the history, okay? Me, I'm not an historian, but I used a tree periodization, if you want. The first periodization is the pre-modern. Pre-modern means before the system of states, okay? So before treaties of Westphalia, but the problem is the modern period, it's 500 years. So you have the pre-modern period. Pre-modern period implies everything before treaties of Westphalia. So the medieval age and the antique age from the Neolithic and from the Sumerian and the Egyptian, okay? The antique age, after that you have medieval age until 1492, as you said. But 1492 is not a legal date. The legal important date for the periodization is the treaties of Westphalia. Of course, some legal scholars, some historians are criticizing these treaties of Westphalia as the birth of the modern state which we live in currently. But the problem, I told you, the modern period started just before the Treaty of Westphalia and continues until 1945. So you have 500 years of modernization, okay? So during this time of modernization between the treaties of Westphalia, a little bit before, and the different big treaties until 1945, it's a 500 of modernization. 500 of modernization between where the concept of state, the concept of borders, the concept of territories, the concept of law, the concept of international public law, the concept of constitutional law, all these things during these 500 years have evolved a lot, okay? And I used the 1945, the Charter of the United Nations in 1945, after the Second World War, as another piece of the modern system, the modern period, which we live currently in. You know, we have different degrees of modernization, if you want. But the 1945 is the last one, if you want, and the last pieces of modernity we live in, okay?
Okay.
And when I use also the concept of post-state or post-modern, it's examples of borders which are not connected to the state. Post-state, post-modern borders are example, and you have a clear example, is the example of borders of the European Union. European Union is not a state. And all the borders created by the European Union are not modern borders because they are not territorial borders. They are something else. And that's me, in my own vocabulary, in my own terminology, I use the concept of postmodern. Postmodern, it means borders, which are not territorial boundaries as in the modern time I just shared with you. So in a nutshell, you have the pre-modern borders, you have the modern borders, and we could identify right now the existence of post-modern borders, which are not connected to the state, which are connected to other legal entities like European Union. But you have also example of post-modern borders with global powers like TikTok, like Twitter, like Amazon. They are not using territorial borders, they are using functional borders. And that's an example of borders which are existing today, and I call that postmodern borders because they are not linked with the territorial boundaries of the state, of the modern state. Okay?
Thank you so much for clarifying.
So it's 9:29. We started. Okay, I will finish the first session of the class and we will start the practicum, okay? A very important legal piece to understand is the differences between territoriality of law and personality of law. It's very important to understand this difference and this shift in the history of law and the history of borders and the history of borders through the prism of law. Before the territory and before the modern state model, how we could identify in history the personality of law, what it means, the personality of law. When I shared with you the map of the Roman Empire, and Paola wrote on the chat that some neighbors of the Roman Empire were weak. It's true. And that's one of the reasons why the Roman Empire collapsed finally, because the alliances were not strong all the time. But the Roman Empire were calling the people from abroad barbarians. They were calling barbarians because they were just stranger to them. And these barbarians people were under their national law. Sorry, not national because it doesn't exist, where their tribe law, their ethnic law. That's very important. At this time, I have an example for you. At the time of the Roman king, the French king Clovis. French king Clovis, he was the king of the French people, of the Frank. He was not the king of the territory of France. He was the king of his tribe. That's very important. You could see a shift between the king of his people. So because they were mobile all the time, they were king of their tribe. It was enough as a source of power. But time after time, every tribe started to be sedentarian. And at this time, after years and years of evolution, after years of sophistication in the legal and political concept, they started to be the king of the territory of the people of the tribe. That's a very important shift. When you understand that, you understand, okay, before the territories, it was not a political power over territories. Of course, it existed somewhere, as we have seen the example of Egypt. But the majority of the power, political power, were on the tribes. They were the king of their own tribes. And these tribes were mobile because they were also fighting with other tribes. They were also finding the best place to live, etc., etc. That's the majority of the political experience at the pre-modern times. But time after time, because the neighbors were more and more strong, because the relations were more and more complex, they started to be sedentary. And at this time, the title of the king was not the king of the tribe. It started to be the king of the territory, where the tribe were living, okay, was living. But because the sedentary process, because the Neolithic Revolution, because the evolution of the concept, because the evolution of the geography, etc., they started to be linked with their territory and not only with their tribes. So I have a key example to share with you, if you are interested by this shift. During a litigation, they were asking one question. Imagine I'm a king of a tribe. And Paola is a king of another tribe, and we are neighbors. But after 100 of years, a lot of people live in the kingdom of Paola and live in my kingdom. And we don't identify, oh, but you're the son of whom? You're the son of the great daughter of Paola, or you're the son of the great daughter of Benjamin. It was impossible to identify where you are from. So that's why during the litigation, they were asking with one question: under which law do you live? The law of the father if it was a legitimate child, and the law of the mother if it was a natural child. But if you're not able to answer this question because you have been living on this place for 300 years, you don't have the memory of the before. Okay, you lost connection with your ancestor. You lost connection with your customs. And because a lot of population were mixing by marriage, etc., it was very difficult to identify the origin of the ethnic. So they were not able to answer under which law do you live. But finally, I don't know who am I. I don't know my ancestors, but I know I live on this territory. I know I live on this territory in this village for the last 50 years. So I know I'm from here. And because this big change, they started to have the territory of law as a dominant law. You understand? I don't know if I was clear enough, but that's a very important shift, very important thing to understand the shift between the personality of law and the territoriality of law, and it's the birth of the modern political system. So we spoke a little bit of Treaties of Westphalia as an important legal document which have created a part of the modern system today. What are the juridical contributions of the Treaties of Westphalia of the juridical region of borders? That's very important, and that's the birth of the modern borders, that's the birth of the legal modern borders. The Treaties of Westphalia, we could identify 4 juridical contributions. First contribution, affirmation of the state as the sole actor in international relations against the Pope and against the empire, and also against the feudal oligarchies. Second contribution, they reject the idea of religious unity of Christianity and reject also the imperial principle. Third contribution, they established the principle of territorial sovereignty at the level, at the internal level and also at the external level. Internal level of territorial sovereignty means a state has exclusive authority over its territory. At the external level, it means no authority is recognized above the state. And fourth contribution, the states are not bounded by precise borders. So the Treaties of Westphalia, they are just one very important legal document in the history of border and the history of legal borders. It's like the roots of the modern system, if you want. Okay, I remember they started before. These roots started a little bit before the Treaties of Westphalia. The Treaties of Westphalia are like a very important symbol in the birth of the modern system of states, which we all live together. We all live in together today. And you will understand now the importance of other perspectives. For example, as Sean mentioned this morning, the importance of the reality of political reality of indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples, they have been living under this dominant system of modern states, but they kept their own territorial sovereignties, their own political powers. That will be discussed Wednesday. So I'm sharing with you the birth of the modern dominant system of states and modern borders. But it's just a dominant model. It means it exists other models, other existence, and other existence, other examples will be shared with you Wednesday. Okay? It is very important after the Treaties of Westphalia, a lot of period of thinkers, of legal thinkers, And this legal fingers, the legal doctrine, if you want, started to realize the importance of having borders and territories clearly delimited. Example, Emmer of Vattel. It was a Swiss jurist, a diplomat, very important one in the 18th century. He wrote different books which have been influential in the history of law and the history of international law. And he wrote that in 1758. The territories must be carefully delimited. Since the slightest usurpation of another's territory is an injustice, to avoid falling into it and to remove any subject of discord, any occasion of quarrel, one must mark with clarity and precision the limits of the territories. Is one of the first quotation with the importance of having a territory clearly delimited by markers and borders and limits. You have another quotation. Jacques Frederick de Belleville, he was a diplomat, he was a practitioner at this time. And he wrote that in 1760. To avoid any dispute or dissension with its neighbors, it's useful to conclude with them treaties of borders which determine exactly the limits of each state. In 1760, he wrote that as a diplomat, as a guy who has an experience in political and diplomatic relations with other states. We notice the birth of modern representation of territorial boundaries or territorial borders at this time. So conclusion, what can we learn from the history of borders? As we have seen during this time, a lot of existence of proof of evidence of existence of borders in the ancient time, during the antiquity, but also during the medieval age. You have the existence of political, legal, material, and territorial differentiations present long time before the state. You have different border elements as marks of political and territorial differentiation between cities, kingdoms, and empires. You remember the city palette. You remember the Egyptians' organizations. You remember the Roman Empire. At this time, during the antiquity time, the legal nature of this limit was protected by gods. It was a law built by gods and protected by gods. And we have been able to see many identified pre-modern borders and a rich archaeological legal heritage in the ancient era. For the Middle Ages, we have been able to identify different types of borders, different types of limits. The limits of jurisdictions between autoritas and potestas. Autoritas and potestas are two main concepts to describe the legal power during the Middle Ages. It's the birth of sovereignty, if you want. The church, as I shared with you, the church was able to divide its own territory by dioceses, but also different types of limits. So the key element of the Middle Age borders is multiplicity of legal limits, because it was before the birth of the territorial borders, the territorial modern borders of the states after Westphalia and the other treaties after Westphalia. Okay, that's the key element. Before treaties of Westphalia, during the medieval age, between 500 years after Christ to 1500 years after Christ, the existence of multiple legal limits with different values for different purposes. What are the border studies? I know Paola has been working on the border studies, but also Tobias has been working on border studies, and also other people have been maybe working on border studies. Could you share with the people on the room, please? What do you think it's border studies? As professional of customs, maybe you have ideas. Maybe you have more knowledge than us about what are border studies. Don't forget to remember the main message I gave you in the introduction, that borders are a complex legal construction with multiple legal dimensions, the border line, and we have seen the history of border lines. the border filter or the border control, the control of the access of the territory, the control of the entries, and we have seen some old example of these controls. We have seen also the example of border links with the alliances between the Roman Empire and the kingdoms which were neighboring this Roman Empire, but also in the Sumerian time and also in the Egyptian time. We have seen also the example of the material element, the marker, just the marker with the example of Ashoka, when the inscription were written in the pillar and the pillar was placed in the roads. We have seen the history of borders, and the key messages is to understand borders as a complex legal construction with multiple dimensions. So what are the border studies? Border studies is a field of research which the birth is complicated to identify. In one article, they said it emerged really in the mid-70s, so 50 years ago. So it's a young, but not so young now. 50 years ago of research about border studies. But we could identify, as I shared with you, with Emer de Vattel, the jurist, or Jacques Frédéric de Béfil, all the figures we speak were working on borders before border studies, okay? They were in their international law books, Emer de Vattel or different authors like Grotius, they were speaking about borders, okay? But it was not border studies per se. Border studies is a huge interdisciplinary field of research where you have geography, history, anthropology, archaeology, sociology, political geography, etc. And you have law. So it's a huge field of research about borders. And the trend of this research is very important, is connected with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the birth of globalization. The fall of Berlin Wall and the birth of globalization during the 80s were part of the birth of border studies as a field of research. But the main idea of border studies in the border study field, its borders are not only line, borders as a social construction. Borders are processual constructions that reflect spatial and social practices and representations. Okay, is different than the territorial borders. Border studies are a field of research which are examining, studying all borders of all kinds, of all types, if you want. So it's a huge field of research, and law is part of that. And law has a lot of work possible on that. Okay, let me check if I have some messages in the okay, let me check this. 2 seconds, the chat, please. Okay. Okay, Rodolfo, you have a good question here. Hi, Ben, can you explain when is originating the linear border in Europe? It is produced after the Peace of Westphalia. But you will have a practicum in few seconds, and you will try to answer that with examples I put on the document. Sandrine, are you able to create the breakout rooms?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me think 2 seconds how it works, these breakout rooms, because you will create breakout rooms with different students, but they have access to the document of the, do they have access to the document of the practicum?
It should be on the link, right?
Okay, everyone, tell me if you have access to the Word document of the first practicum of the first sessions, because you will need to work on that. Okay, Tobias, you have. Everyone, I think if Tobias has, the others have the access to this document. So we will divide we will divide the team, the room in 3 groups. So I continue my small during some. You will let me know when. Fine, we'll let you know when you will start.
Yeah, just let me know when you want.
Okay. To continue about border studies, one famous philosopher, Etienne Balibar, spoke about borders are mobile. Borders are not territorial delimitation. Borders are something more complex, more furtive. But he said also borders are everywhere. Entry control, territorial surveillance, inside, outside territories. For the border study specialists, borders have multiplied, they are now dematerialized, deterritorialized, and they use these 3 important concepts like bordering, debordering, and rebordering. These 3 concepts are important because they are easy to understand. Bordering is creation of borders effects. Bordering is creation of border limits. Bordering is creation of differentiation between me and you, between people and other people. Okay, that's the bordering processes. It could be wall, it could be fortifications, it could be new custom law, it could be etc., etc., etc. That's a huge, important concept to describe and to gather all these different elements of frontierization, exclusion, discrimination, etc. But you have also the concept of debordering. Debordering is the opposite of bordering. Debordering is not when you close border, it's when you open borders. It's when you open borders to the flows. It's when you stop the controls. Okay? And you have the rebordering, or the rebordering is intuitive, is when you restart to border, to use the bordering politics. Okay, that's a very 3 important concept you could use in your policy papers if you have been selected for the policy papers or in your own writings. That's 3. But bordering and debordering are 2 important concepts to describe the phenomenon of what's going on today. I share with you an old map about Hungary. It's an old map from the 17th century, but you could read in the legend on the bottom left corner. It's written a new and exact map of Hungary and the bordering countries betwixt Vienna and Constantinople. So this map is from 17 something, but just to show with you the use of bordering. Bordering at this time, so it means 300 years ago, they were using the word bordering like neighbors countries. In this map, it's written the bordering countries, it means neighbors countries. They were using the word bordering long time before the border studies as a synonym of neighbor, of limitrof.